Back, everyone. I've introduced Keld Nielsen many times, more than a decade, more than 15 years. In fact, Keld is the Global Strategic Director of Kantar, which is part of the WPP group for a while. And he is one of our original overseas speakers. When the rest of the world didn't know about Pamro, who we are, this little dot, bottom of the continent, he supported us. So thank you, Keld. You've always believed in us, and you can see what we've grown to from when you first started coming to Pamro. Keld is a rocket scientist. I always tell people that. He started his career in the European Space Agency. So we've had the anniversary of the moon landing. I'm sure you can tell us a bit about that today. He has over 25 years in the media research industry and is well qualified to talk on the topic of television, as he runs panels and sets up panels all over the world. And he was instrumental in the first panel in Denmark. So, is TV dead? Let's hear about it, Keld. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I'm going to take you down from space to basic audience measurement. First of all, I would say thank you for the invitation. I've really enjoyed being back, and I must say you have outdone yourself with the venue this time. I really enjoy that. So thank you so much for that. I started in the media research space in February 1992. And about 5 minutes in my career in this area, I saw this statement for the first time. And there was a launch of VCRs, and this 30-second spots was dead. And last time I checked, television is still alive and kicking, and we're still more than $200 billion of advertising running through television. It is a fact that the traditional or the established brands are under pressure. But it's also a fact that we are spending more time on screens, and television is definitely not dead. It just had some babies. And these small babies need all the attention that all babies need. So the big challenge around the world at the moment, if I look at in a global perspective, it's all about measurement of online consumption, video online consumption. And this is what I'm going to talk mainly about. So I'm going to take you through a whistle-stop tour about I'm going to talk about 5 cases that we're doing around the world. I could have picked others, but I just picked these 5. So in order to measure this, in about 4 years ago, we launched what we call the blueprint. And the blueprint is all about how to measure audience measurement. And we at Kantar believe in this structure where we have the television audience measurement panel at the very core. That has been established since the 80s, and we still believe that that is a very vital thing for audience measurement for television. What has happened since then, because the core television panel only measure the consumption of the big TV screens, now we are seeing set meter panels come in, we see return pass data being connected to the panels, and the online sensors, so tagging of online content, the usage of first and third party data. So I'm going to touch a bit about these topics. This is the footprint of what we are doing around the world, in different shapes and forms. So this is not just currency measurements, so return pass data, television, radio, etc., etc. I'm going to take you through 5 cases, as I said, from Denmark, my home country, Norway, a bit of Italy, China, and Canada. So let me start, home country, Denmark. Very nice beer to the left, by the way. In Denmark, we have a setup where we have a core panel, a base panel of 2,600 individuals using people meter technology as it's known, widely used around the world. We have a digital panel that measure using a meter called the virtual meter. It's a digital panel that measure online consumptions on smartphones, on tablets and computers. These are all, the broadcasters are all tagging their contents, so we are getting census data for that. So each and every statement is used. That data is used to calibrate the panels, the online panels. And then there's a web profile panel, which is 28,000 individuals, where we have their device IDs, so we can extract the data, their usage, online usage from the broadcasters, and can use that to enhance the online data. So that's the Danish setup in its totality. The Danish setup right now is actually up for tender, so it will most likely going to change, and I'm going to explain to you why that's going to happen. Because when they did the setup, they were probably a bit too early out, because in the Danish system, you cannot measure online consumption on smart TVs. You only measure on the babies that I talked about earlier, but you do not measure online streaming consumption, so the usage of Chromecast and things like that is not measured in the Danish service. So what they saw in Denmark was I would say, a moderate to a small increase of the consumption, so only 3% overall, which was a bit of a disappointment for the Danish broadcasters at the time, and still is, by the way. They were expecting larger numbers in the increase. And if you look at the top 10 program, you will see to the very right there, very sort of insignificant increases on program levels overall. But if you look at the top 10 programs, you will see significant increases. More than one third of that program, which is actually a Norwegian program, came from the digital environment at the time that broadcast. So jumping a bit to Norway, in Norway, which is 1/3 of the population there has a second home. So out-of-home measurement in Norway was added to the blueprint. So what they did in Norway was two things different from the Danish setup. Firstly, they used a meter called the focal meter, which is a router meter that is connected to the home Wi-Fi router in the home. So this meter is picking up all sorts of viewing, including the consumption of the smart TV. What they also have is a separate panel for out-of-home viewing, which is a portable meter that is used and based on radar-on-air, which is a meter that has been developed by a French company called Médiamétrie, which is a device like Nielsen's PPM. It's a small portable meter, so everybody, I think, knows what that's about. So that is added to the viewing in Norway. So jumping back to the focal meter, this is a router meter that is being deployed in about 10 countries across the world at the moment. And as I said, this is picking up all the Wi-Fi communication in a whitelisted environment, so you only pick up the agreed broadcaster content. So you're not picking up any banking or any gaming or any things like that. So everybody is aware what kind of data is extracted from that meter. And the result of this compared to the Danish one, and you can compare those two environments more or less like for like, but you will see a significantly higher uplift here in the ratings. And people were a bit sort of surprised about how big that uplift was when it came. As you can see, close to 1/4 in the 20 to 29 year of that consumption. This is broadcast consumption only. So there's no Netflix, there's no YouTube, there's no nothing else. This is only broadcast content. So significantly uplift there, and everybody was quite happy about that. But what the meter also can do is can also pick up sort of the overall consumptions of services like YouTube and Netflix. And here you can see how much that is actually adding. So in total, here you're adding 27 minutes of online consumption, being Netflix and YouTube and tagged broadcast content, which is I would say Norway is in the digital front line of what is happening. There's a massive broadband penetration in Norway. So what they also did in Norway was try to break it down and see what happens in terms of consumption. And the first pie here is actually broadcast content. And that explains the difference between the 3% and the 8% in Denmark. Whereas you can see 60% of the consumption in Norway of broadcast is actually done on the TV screen and not on the mobile devices. So a significant uplift there. And no surprise, the Netflix consumption is quite similar to the broadband consumption, sort of in terms of distribution, and the YouTube is much more mobile than the Netflix and the broadcast consumption. So very interesting findings when this was launched in January 17. The next one I'm going to talk about is Italy. And Italy is interesting because Italy is a collaboration between the Nielsen company and Comscore and Kantar. Because in Italy, Nielsen is running the TV panel, so they have two panels. They have a people meter panel with Nielsen technology, and they have a set meter panel also with Nielsen technology. They have merged these two panels into what they call a super panel. And what is happening at the moment is that we are installing, or actually Nielsen technicians are installing the Kantar focal meter in the set meter panel in order to get the online consumption and get that fused and integrated into the TV panel in Italy. So, and I think it's worth mentioning because I personally believe, and it is also our belief at Kantar, that partnerships between the vendors is more and more increasingly important. There's no such thing as, everybody can do everything. You need to partner in different ways and shapes and forms. And I think the Italian one is a very good example of doing that. So that's why I felt that was worth mentioning. Canada is interesting because they had some quite significant changes driven by the government. And at the moment, they have a core panel. This is based on PPM, so this is a portable meter technology of 9,100 individuals there. Single source for radio, 8 different panels, and a sort of a national overlay for the whole setup there. So what is happening now is that they have chosen to establish a separate panel with focal meters where they're picking up the online viewing on a separate panel, and are going to fuse this two together. Again, with tagging, the whole 9 yards. But the interesting thing about Canada is that the government have passed a law that all the IP providers, all the satellite providers are to make the data available into the currency industry. So what is happening right now is that we have made a proof of concept where we are taking return path data for 5 different providers or platforms in Canada. We have harmonized that data, and we have brought it in and fused it into the TV currency there. And this is the first in the world that this is actually happening, where we are taking a traditional TV panel and fusing it with return path data. And in this case, 5 different ones, and probably a couple of more to come. And this is being rolled out this year and going to go live next year. So they're going to set that up. Different example is China. China, there's a lot of talk around the world about YouTube don't want to tag, YouTube don't want to be transparent. In China, you have 2 different streaming providers, Qiji and Youku. We have made an agreement with these 2 guys. And we are getting access to their sort of log server data in China. So the example I'm going to give here is the Qiji one, where we are taking the 52 biggest markets in China, which is around about 250 million people there. So 52 TV panels, and we are getting the data from Qiji, the single source data, so we are extracting the information from the panelists in those 52 panels. and we are fusing that into the TV panels or the viewing data in China. Very interesting findings, because when you are GG viewer, you are a serious GG viewer. So if you look at that, they are ranking as number 10 overall in consumption. And if you look at them in connected home, it is the biggest channel at all in China in those 52 markets there. So very interesting findings, and we're doing the same thing with Youku at the moment. So we are hopefully bringing these 3 data sets together. And originally I was planning to present some new products, but last night after dinner I was sort of thinking maybe it was a good idea to be a bit controversial instead. I have been coming to Pamro for around about 15 years, I think. And over those 15 years, there's been a lot of talk. I'm now taking South Africa out of the equation and talking about the remaining 53 countries. Say, what is the African challenge? In my view, I normally say there are 2 parts of the world that doesn't do audience measurement. That is the Middle East, and that is Africa. The Middle East doesn't do it because they don't want it. Simple as that. We've tried it, we have pushed it, we have had meetings with governments, we have had panels set up, and we walked out again. And I normally say, why doesn't Africa do it as a continent? They don't do it because they can't afford it. I have been saying that for the last probably 15 years, but I'm now starting to have doubts about whether that is actually still true. Because when I see the growth that is happening in specific markets in Africa, the bigger markets, and compare that to the financial or the overall finances in countries in Latin America, there are definitely markets in Africa that should be able to establish a decent, transparent currency measurement, and it's still not happening. So I tend, sorry to say, but I tend to believe it is not happening in Africa because the African markets don't want it to happen. And that's a statement that I hope can trigger some debate in this room, because I know it's a controversial statement, but I really don't think that some of the biggest markets in Africa should actually have TAM measurements, and they don't want it. And let that be my closing statement, and hope that can trigger some questions. So thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Keld. Could you stay up there, please? So, hi guys, Keld, could you, because this is one of the topics we started in Lagos, if you remember, and there was some heated debate from JICs, from people who wanted to set up JICs. I think, Brenda, you had something to say, Kantar, Nielsen, because we've had views on this, and we need TAM viewership data on the continent. So, does anyone want to start the debate?
I can just say, I used Latin America as an example. I could easily use Eastern Europe as an example. There are a lot of very, very small markets in Eastern Europe that has significantly lower advertising expenditure on television than some of the biggest markets in Africa. And it's still, and they do have TAM services. It's not huge services, but it's there, and it's trading currencies, and they're actually basing their currency around this. One of the things that I believe that is still lacking is that the multinational advertisers need to be pushing this, because I don't think that the broadcasters in those markets want the change. And I don't know whether there are any of these broadcasters present at the moment, but I don't think they want that change to happen because it's very convenient what they're doing today. I just know as a fact that if I look at Middle East and if I look at Africa as a continent, the advertising expenditure is way too low on television, and this is one of the reasons why. That's my opinion.
Okay, over to Brenda.
Okay, I cannot remember what I said last year. Okay, but I'm going to continue with the controversy and to say it's more than the broadcasters. I think it's advertisers, agencies, and marketers. I think there's a way in which media is traded, the way things are priced, the way they're bought, and I think there might be egg on faces when the real audience data comes out. And you know, let me give a South African example here from another industry. I've recently been looking at the out-of-home data, and which is a new measurement system to the South African market, and been working with a very well-established outdoor company. And what we saw when they've put audience data to their current way of selling is that it's bizarre. You know, it's nothing really makes a lot of sense. The pricing's all over the place, the targeting's all over the place, and it's like, oh my goodness, now we're going to have to change. And it takes brave people to reprice, repackage, rethink. So yes, the broadcasters are part of it, but it's the whole ecosystem of advertising that would need to change.
And there are actually good examples that it can be done. So I can think of two good examples when Norway changed their radio currency into electronic measurement. They simply redefined or recalibrated the whole pricing model because everybody was aware that this was apples and bananas. And I think when Arbitron, now Nielsen in the US, they had the same issue with the radio industry when they changed to electronic measurement there. So it definitely can be done. And it was done for television way back when the panels were launched in Europe. So I agree with you, Brenda, and it shouldn't be an excuse. It should just happen.
Thank you, Brenda. Anyone else? Put your hand
So
up.
where's the money?
So we had Coca-Cola. We had Liana, who's in charge of the global Coca-Cola budget at a Pamro conference. And we said to her, why don't you advertise on the rest of the continent? And she said, I would love to advertise in Rwanda and Nigeria and Ethiopia, but my guys want to see the figures. And we need to know that the multinationals won't come and advertise on television until they see the figures, the cost per points, the ROI. And we all know that when there's a media measurement in place, the GDP goes up. The industry, as you were saying, out of home, you know, more is spent on that particular medium. Celia.
I think from a media agency side, we get pressed a lot from the procurement department. And the longer we stay away from getting TAMs in the certain markets, the harder it is for us to go and get investment into some of these markets. So I think as a collective, and what Brenda said, we should all be on the same page within the marketing industry to say if we want to go out and get big investments coming into Africa, we actually need to follow this step in getting measurement into place.
Thank you, Sealed. Jonadab.
Thanks, Jen. Initially, I was just telling here that I will not say anything this time because I remember I said something last year in Lagos and a lot of controversy around that. But I changed my mind following Celia's point, talking about the procurement of the advertisers putting a lot of pressure, wanting to see also the numbers as Jenny pointed out. I think we have a collective responsibility to always let the same clients that we work for know that the cost can stay the same. Because the main thing from my little experience is that they're asking, where am I going to pass that money to? The consumer already reeling under difficult manufacturing or production circumstances, and then costing and pricing of my product. I'm even cutting back on my own margins. So where am I going to pass this huge money to? To the same consumer that are already reeling? It's going to be difficult. And how am I even going to present this to my board to get an approval? So that's the main issue. So it's not only, I agree that some sectors, some stakeholders may not want things to change, but I do know that in many African countries, they really want things to change. The advertiser, the media owners or the broadcasters are agreeing to change. The outdoor practitioners are calling, look, we want to get measurement. And I don't want to mention names here because we are all working together, but I think I like the Canada example of 5 providers coming together to collaborate, and you said there's no need wanting to do everything, that you can all come together. So that's why I would not mention it, because we might soon, we would like to replicate that here in Africa. But the point is that we all need to be convincing all the stakeholders that if we must get that improved data, get a good currency, it wouldn't come at the same cost of what we are doing now. So let us be prepared and have a timetable of when we can take on that cost, or what model can we use to gradually accrue or make up for the cost. So that's the point I want to make. It can't be the same, and we need to continually tell the procurements and the clients that they've got to approve the money. Otherwise, we just stay there and just mount it, and nothing happens. Thank you.
Can I comment a bit on that? Because I genuinely and honestly don't believe that this is a question about money. And the reason I'm saying that is that if I compare the money spent on audience measurement, you can probably only produce a few hours of X factor for the amount of money you are spending on a TAM audience measurement in a year. So this is more a question about a will to actually allocate the budgets for a transparent currency that can be traded upon. And it is a proven fact that a trading currency, once it has been established, it will help grow the advertising expenditure in that specific country. That has been seen all over the place. So it's not a question about allocating a few $1 million, and I mean a few $1 million, because a few $1 million is nothing at a big broadcaster compared to what they're spending on program and content. So I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it's a question about money, it's a question about will. And that's why I'm saying, and I've changed my mind on this, I say, Africa couldn't afford it back then. That is no longer true.
So, you lost your name yesterday, Brenda. Don't lose it again. So this is about 4 years ago. I was at a conference, and they were really talking about recalibrating some of the data I think it was in Spain, if I can remember correctly. And what happened is, obviously, when they were looking at those numbers, when they actually recalibrated it, the numbers dropped. So obviously, their turnovers dropped. But the reality is, once people felt comfortable with that the numbers were real, the turnover shot through the roof at the end of the day. So if the broadcasters are really scared about their numbers dropping or whatever the issue is because the numbers are incorrect, I promise you, transparency will show that actually the numbers will turn. So that's the one point. The second point is, Keld, you're right. We've been talking about it for years and years and years and years. Yeah. I also don't believe that there's no money in Africa. I think, as Pamro, that maybe we just talk about it, and talk is cheap. What we should do is actually create a subcommittee to actually push this kind of forward, because that's the only way we're going to do it, is we actually have a purpose and objective, and let's kind of go through and just do it.
Yeah, and I can speak on behalf of my own company, and I know I can speak on behalf of my colleagues from Nielsen and JFK and Ipsos and whoever. The technology is there. It's just a question about doing it.
I think from where I sit, we need to look at the corporate governance at the level of GICs. GICs are not very well governed, and that has been putting a lot of pressure onto many people want to invest in that. And then moving forward again, there's that bit that we're used to the status quo as Africa, and advertisers, researchers, and the government, the authorities, everyone thinks that the status quo is okay. We don't want to spend money. And I agree with you that it's not about budget. It's not about anything. It's just a step change that people have refused to see the need of credible data that can be used. And with that, you find that the place of syndicated research becomes a very, very slippery place in Africa. So what do? Can we have somebody who can accept amongst all these stakeholders to underwrite that risk? And that becomes a problem for us researchers, because we are left holding the baby and the rest of the stakeholders are looking at us because we look like the people who have an interest in all this. So we need to look at how do the GICs raise up the stakes, how do they raise up their governance so that there's a lot of trust and people would want to invest in that. Then we have a currency that is acceptable and acceptable across the market. To me, that's what is the biggest problem.
Yep. Anyway, I
Can
know
I-
I'm not going to win
sorry.
any popularity contest by this.
Last comment,
but,
Brenda. I
I
know
just
this
wanted
is huge debate. Can you see? We'll carry on over lunch, but one more comment before we go on to the next speakers, please.
Sorry, I'm
We
just
could be here all afternoon debating this, and that's why
That's the whole point.
Thank you for opening it up.
I just wanted to address the
This was
gorilla in the room, I think it was, right?
This was
Anyway,
completely
thank you.
unplanned, by the way. I just had to go and see if we had some roving mics.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
sorry.
No. Claire Harris.
Look, I think the issue of governance is an important one, but I think there's also an issue of governance within broadcasting organisations. I think the way you've traded, varies across the spectrum, and that needs to be looked at also. And the concern about where does the money come from, proper measurement provides enormous opportunities. You talked about not having measurement in the Middle East. One place we Nielsen have got measurement is in radio in UAE. And what's really interesting, because there are assumptions about breakfast radio being big, about evening radio being big, but we found that there were actually 3 peaks through the day. That creates an enormous opportunity for the broadcasters in terms of their pricing. So, if you've got measurement, you can work out where you've got roadblocks in your schedule. You can work out how to price it effectively. You can reduce an awful lot of wastage. And I feel like, I'm the research supplier, but I'm supporting Keld on this one. I think that there's an enormous amount of opportunity that comes with it. It's kind of like the AI thing. Don't be afraid, guys. Be willing to embrace.
So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Keld. Thank you, everyone, for contributing. This is always a fiery debate, and we'll continue to do it every year. We're getting there, guys. Okay. So, and what I liked about the Canadian model was there was buy-in, hybrid models, different measurements from the different operators. I always believe we should integrate a return path data and a TAM panel, because that's what most people have, so we can start there. We need to think about those things.